Hey, why don't we go ahead and get started? We do have 4 people here. It is after 7:30. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Let's call the meeting to order if we can. The April 10th City Council work session. If we could all maybe get seated and get started with things. We do have a quorum. So let's go ahead and get started. I know not everyone's here, but it is time to get started, and let's go ahead and do that. So if there are any preliminary matters, maybe we could take care of those before we get to substantive matters that may require more of us to be here. Is there anything that we, Wyatt, it's preliminary nature, that we could discuss that we should get out of the way?
I'm just thinking ahead to Wednesday's meeting, your regular meeting. It does have all of the budget items just for public hearing, so there's no council action requested on any of these budget items, obviously next Wednesday.
Okay.
And, looking ahead to April 28th is the date that the council would take action on all these things. There is an item on the agenda, 2 items for the council to take action on that are proposed on the agenda. One is to refer the downtown area plan out to boards and commissions for their comment. And we're working with some individual council members who had some follow-up items to hopefully address those on the front end before it gets referred out. And then secondly, I wanted the council to be aware that we have a request for a contract approval for daylighting the Co-Branch and the Pearson stream restoration projects. And that's a contract approval. It's in the CIP, and there's been a fair amount of discussion about that. And that project is 50% paid for with state and federal grants. We are working with neighbors on the issue of the resource protection area. That when, the irony is when you try to do a good thing for the environment and daylight a stream, that does bring in adjacent properties into the resource protection area, which has very strong land use regulations associated with it. So we've been working to develop a policy document for the council, which would basically state the intention to lay out a process which those property owners can get exceptions to those RPA requirements. And so that we don't think is ready for Wednesday night, and so the request would be the council approve the contract so that the project could stay on the critical path with some faith that we'll be able to have a good resolution that will work for the neighbors on the RPA issues that have been raised. So I just wanted to highlight as a point of discussion for Wednesday.
So also before we get started, maybe on substantive matters, we did have a request to move the meeting. Is it June 16th because of graduation? Apparently someone wants to go to their child's graduation. And but is there any discussion about how that works for scheduling? I presume that email went to everyone. It appeared that it did. Is there anyone? What day would you propose to move that hearing to? Wyatt?
We were proposing just to move it to Tuesday, one day ahead. But
one day ahead or behind?
One day after.
Yeah, one day after. Okay.
Yeah, so
And is there anybody have a conflict with that or any issues with that?
it'll be June 17th.
Any issue with moving the date to the 17th?
People are going to go to Beach Week immediately after graduation.
Okay. All right, so why don't we go ahead? I've got a niece graduating then as well. So why don't we go ahead and move the date to the 17th and make sure the proper notice goes out to the right folks? Excuse me? Yeah, sure.
Wyatt, are the neighbors of the Co-Branch aware that you're working on a solution?
Yes, we have. We've been. A letter has gone out to every property owner that would be affected by the RPA, and so that was delivered directly to their house. There have been, I think, 5 property owners that have been particularly interested in this issue that we've worked with, face to face on the issue. There are, I think, 3 or 4 other property owners that we haven't had physical contact with, but they've gotten a letter.
Okay.
Back to the date change. That Tuesday is the regular meeting date for the Budget and Finance Committee at 7:30. So we will change that to be determined later when and where.
Okay. I tell you, before we get started, I happened to speak with Mr. Clinton, who's in the audience. Did you want to speak to council? I know you were teed up maybe earlier, and and were unable or just through confusion didn't get it. Before you begin, maybe I'd like to read a disclosure if I could, real quick. It relates to the budget. With regard to the City Council's consideration of the city's budget and the budget for the City of Falls Church Public Schools, I would like to disclose that my wife's employed by the city's public schools. She is a member of a group of 3 or more persons, the members of which are affected by the city and the school's budgets. Therefore, I am able to certify that I'm able to participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Ms. Conley?
And I also, with regard to the budget of the City of Falls Church and the Falls Church Schools budget, disclose that I am an employee of Falls Church City Public Schools, and this discussion may pertain to my employer. However, I'm a member of a group of 3 or more individuals affected by this matter, and I certify that I can participate in the discussion fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you. Do you have any disclosures, Mr. Clinton?
No, I don't have any.
All right. All right, why don't you go ahead and
I just wanted to, present myself in front of everybody, see if they had any questions about the budget document. It does start on 97, and it seems like we're, not growing too much as a percentage, and when you factor in the net expenditures supported by general revenue, it's 1.43%. But the underlying thing is really the workload, and it's getting kind of at a tipping point. I know and we've certainly heard that from lots of other folks, but I just wanted to make sure people were very aware of that. In a revenue generating office, it can actually help, fiscal problems. And, I've cited some examples there, and, people have kind of written us and thanked us for some of the things that we've done. And, we've kind of got this DMV, which is, taken off. And I do have the agreement with the DMV, and it's up every year. And that would be one way for me to cut workload. And I've never really seriously considered it, but I am kind of starting to think about it. It would be bittersweet, but it would be one way to kind of really slow up the work. So, that kind of would play a decision in how, if the position is funded. And I know there's a lot of other things that we do that, you appreciate, like the economic development numbers that help make big, important decisions. And we bring the DMV bus here and try to do lots of other things. And I know Gary has gone on about economic development numbers, and, all of those things do run through our office. And as we grow as a community and grow as a business community, everything does run through that office, other than, commercial real estate assessments. So that's about all I had. If you have any questions, let me know.
And Mayor,
happy to.
if I may, just as a reminder, at the end of last work session, I handed out the memo that Mr. Clinton provided, just as a
Little
cross-reference.
two-pager.
Okay. Thanks. Do we have any questions for Mr. Clinton?
So, may I, Mr. Mayor?
Of course.
So the memo, I haven't had a chance to study it in detail, but you do break out the total number of vehicles and business licenses and so forth that you process. So if we're looking for data points to help make our decision, that's where we turn. I just personally would hope that we would continue the DMV service, because it's not only convenient for residents, and will become more so when Tyson's goes into its, mega construction mode to grow to 130,000 people. It'll become especially convenient when none of us want to go out there. But also, for instance, I think when the water vehicles transferred over, that was all handled by your office. And that's the kind of convenience to government that saves money and time. Cindy, just one question. This jumps ahead to the CIP, but relates a little bit. In the design for the City Hall, there is a plan for Tom and Kathy's office not to be the welcoming center for the entire facility, right?
Correct. There'll be a central front entrance. There'll still be easy access and accessible access to Treasurer, Commissioner of Revenue, Clerk of Court.
Okay, because as it stands now, and until we make that change, that office really is the first place that many people land and go asking for directions, as well as for the services that
It
they
will
render.
improve the directionality as well as where people enter City Hall.
Right, so we appreciate that additional service that you provide.
Yes. What I'm a little concerned about is really the future. We have Northgate more or less opening this month, right? It's going to be, 95 apartments, townhomes, and retail spaces, and then you've already approved the Rushmark Harris Teeter and the Tinner Hill, which, you know, has a, you know, pretty large, you know, both commercial and residential component. So I see more work kind of everywhere we're going, and we're happy to do it. We're, you know, 4 out of the 8 of us are city residents. You know, these dollars that we collect and assess help our tax rate and fund the services in the schools and things that we're vested in. So, and I wanted to leave you with one suggestion. I know everybody's looking for more money. I think there's one way to kind of save money. It certainly needs revisiting, and that would be the tech zone. We have a technology zone that's really not been revised since it was instituted back when Murney Fitzgerald was here. So it kind of tells you how long it's been. And of course, the definition of technology has changed tremendously. It is a very generous program, and I think we really need to tweak it. And this is nothing new. We've talked to Richard about it and economic development staff, and they agreed. Unfortunately, it's not having the effects that we kind of thought it would. And I think we need to, you know, really look at that, since we're really counting on every revenue dollar to be kind of putting it out there and not getting the return. I think we need to be careful. It's hard enough to raise it. I think we want to put it in places that we get the return that we want. So I would just leave you with that.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Sure.
Where is the tech zone?
Well, it's all over the city. It's not in a geographic area. It has to do with the type of work that they do, if it's considered, you know, technology work. It gets a little subjective, and, you know, it gets kind of difficult to kind of pin down. And what happens is people pay no business license taxes for 3 years. And unfortunately, most of them leave after that. So you either need to tweak the formula longer, reduce the amount of, you know, abatement of taxes to maybe 50%. There's, you know, lots of different ways. And I think, you know, and no other jurisdiction kind of offers anything like this. It's very, very tight definitions on those that qualify. And, you know, it's just something I think we need to revisit.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I really appreciate all your hard work and your service to the community. Thank you. Mr. Shields?
And just to pile on a little bit, I will say that I get probably more unsolicited emails from people who are delighted with the service that they get from the Commissioner of Revenue's office. You know, people who've had things delivered to them, or State Department employees who are moving in and out, who have difficult situations handled very well by the Commissioner's office. Yeah, it represents the city very well. Shifting to the budget options that are before the council. What I would like to do is walk the council through these ideas, and this is proposed as a framework for moving the budget towards closure and towards adoption, and looking for your feedback and guidance on this basic framework. And we would then get together. It would be discussed, obviously, on Wednesday the 16th at your regular meeting, and then at the work session on the 21st. When we hope to have the council arrive at decisions so that we can then put that into legislative language and have it ready for adoption on the 28th. First, just in terms of the basic framework of the gap that we're trying to close, the council's guidance at the last meeting was to present options for a flat real estate tax rate. With the organic revenue growth of 4.6%, and general government growth at 3.56%, and the school board request at 9.77%, we have a $1.6 million gap. In the proposed budget, that is closed with a 4.5 increase in the real estate tax rate. So let's work through some options where we do things differently. The council did, you know, in their discussion at the work session, they asked for thinking outside the box, for some options that we may not have considered in the past. There was also, I think, a sense that I perceived from the council that there was not a desire to have deep sort of major changes to service delivery or to programs, but to make some cuts, but also have some other options. So one of those was a scrub of our revenue numbers. We do that with our third quarter financial report. And the question is, naturally, with additional data, are there any revisions to our overall tax revenue forecast? And the answer to that is really no. There are no significant changes that are warranted based on the increased data that we received with the third quarter financial report. And I've laid out just, 4 of our major economic indicators: personal property taxes, sales, meals, and BPOL. Our FY14 year-end projection is listed in the left-hand column. What's built into the FY15 budget is in the right-hand column, and the percentage growths that are forecast. So all of them have pretty healthy and pretty normal rates of growth in our FY15 budget forecast. BPOL is a little bit unusual in its large increase, and that is us looking ahead to capturing contractors who will be building the major development projects in the city. Sales tax, we do assume that there'll be sales tax growth due to the Fortune grocery store coming online. That's built into that rate of increase there. If it were not for that, what our observed trend on sales tax is that it has really plateaued out in the last 12 months. And so the growth of retail is driven by new retail coming online. I would just note that real estate is really a known thing with the alignment of the tax year and the fiscal year. It's just a multiplication process as opposed to a reading the tea leaves and a guess as to what assessed value will be next year. So the next question that the council posed was, can we reduce our operating budget by moving one-time expenditures out of the operating budget and pay for them using post office lot sale proceeds or fund balance or other things like that? And that's in line with the council's financial policies. Their policy states you can use one-time money for one-time expenditures, and the response is that we were aggressive in doing that and developing the budget. There really are in the operating budget, there are no studies, there are no vehicle purchases, there are no major acquisitions, consultants that are in the tax rate. They are all moved out to the transportation fund. They've been moved, they're either in the pay-as-you-go CIP, for instance, for the school planning effort, and so we really don't have things there. However, in our scrub, what we did look at is our debt service. We have the ability to refund some of the proceeds from recent debt issuances, and by so doing, reduce our debt service for FY15. And so that came out of that process. That's a savings of $280,000 that we would propose as essentially a change to the budget. And so in any of the scenarios that we present, those debt service savings we would recommend. So that's a good start. So option 1 takes that reduction in expenditures and steps it forward to a level that would allow reductions in the requested increases from general government and from schools that would allow for what is the equivalent of a 2.6 cent reduction in the tax rate. It's $938,000 of reduced spending. 282 of that is from the debt service savings, 638,000 of that from reductions, actual reductions in our budget. So a policy issue for the council so that we can go forward and then bring reductions to you are twofold. One, the proportion of reductions to the general government and schools, and then secondly, discussion about areas where the council would think it would be appropriate to reduce expenditures, whether those be in the new initiatives that were proposed to the council or other areas of spending that the council would say, look there first before you look here. And then we'll come back. We can have that discussion tonight and then come back at our next meeting with a list. The proportion of reductions that I have proposed for the council is tied to the rate of increase between the general government and schools, and so if you took that proportionality, there would be reductions of $238,000 on the general government budget and $400,000 from schools, with some rounding there. But the nexus of that ratio is tied to the rates of requested growth in spending on those two big areas of the city budget. Option 2, the council has asked for options to provide a level tax rate aside from cutting services or programs. So what we wanted to do is provide council with information which has been requested by the Budget and Finance Committee. It's a natural question. What is their forecast for year-end surpluses for FY14? And so we've listed those out, and the big positive is assessed value. Right now, our tax year and our fiscal year are not aligned, and so when the budget was adopted last year, we made a guess as to what assessed value would grow for the June billing, which will be mailed in just a few weeks. We forecast a 2% growth in assessed value. The actual is 6.8. That produces $931,000 of revenue in FY14. Public service corporation taxes are coming in $31,000 high. Personal property is $365,000 high. Business licenses are $100,000 below our projections. The water fund administrative fee is $600,000 below projections. Obviously, we're not taking that out.
Could I interrupt you?
Sure.
For a second, if you don't mind? Would that break your stride, anybody? So I'm not sure I follow that. I thought we were really trying to essentially flatten out that fee. You know, in other words, plan, because it was, I think, a $1 or $1.2 million loss in connection with discussion of the sale of the water authority, and that we would need to make up that delta basically through savings. In other words, not just saying, well, things are going to stay the same.
Yeah.
So tell me what happened there.
Well, we have, we went through our budgets, and there are reductions in our motor pool fleet maintenance and other areas of the budget. But in terms of finding $1.2 million of cuts, we don't have those to present. So what we did is we took an across-the-board approach of constraining spending. And so the economy was providing us with 6.4% of organic, well, yeah, but in terms of organic growth of revenue, it's 6.4%. We took the $2.2 million the $1.2 million completely out of the general operating budget side and came forward with a budget that was below economic growth with the 3.6% growth in our budget. So we really spread those reductions on, in that framework across the city organization.
But so in terms of, not to belabor the point, but it sounds like by spreading out everything, it almost seems like there weren't specific cuts associated with this. I mean, were there specific cuts associated with the disposition of the water system?
There were some, like in motor automobile maintenance and things like that. But in terms of reducing the HR department, we have 3 staff there. No, we did not propose that. In terms of the finance department, where we have 7 staff, we did not produce reductions to there, the city attorney, the city manager's office, city council, those areas, just because we don't believe that we can. And so we took the other approach.
Okay, maybe we'll come back to that. But anyway, I apologize for interrupting, but
Okay. Now, I will say that in terms of the discussion about the use of fund balance, I think one extraordinary thing that has occurred in this year's budget is the loss of that revenue. And so in terms of a policy approach towards, how could we justify the use of fund balance in our operating budget for FY15 if the council were to go that way, an approach to smoothing the loss of that revenue by using funds that are available, I think would be a justifiable approach. To say we're going to draw this down, not take the shock to the system all in one year and have the taxpayers or reductions in spending to absorb that whole loss in 1 year, but to smooth it over maybe 2 years. And so that, I think, is worthy of consideration in thinking about this approach. But at any rate, the result is that on the revenue side alone, the projection for FY14 is a revenue surplus of $680,000. Now, I will note right at the outset that in the FY15 budget, all of the current unassigned fund balance above the 17% target is allocated in the CIP. And so we would anticipate, if we had no surplus in FY14, that we would end the year at right at the 17% target. But in fact, we anticipate that revenues will come in above, so this $680,000 is not spoken for. And in addition to that, there will be underspending in our general government budget. We don't yet have a figure for that because we're still working on that, but it can be predicted that there will be some. And so that's really what this discussion is about, is not going below the 17% target in any meaningful degree, but using the FY14 surplus. The impact of it, though, which we've discussed and you've heard me say ad nauseum, so I'll say it one more time, that when you look ahead to FY16, that's a one-time source of revenue. And so when you look at your forecast for FY16, you begin with expenditures at a level that will be $680,000 above what your revenues are. And so you can overcome that if revenues exceed projections and expenditures come in below what you would normally expect them to do. And if there is planning for that, this is a dollar amount that can be overcome. But I think if the council were to take this option, the eyes need to be wide open about the implications of it. The other thing that I would note in this context is that we have local funding coming out for transportation projects. It's coming out of fund balance, and that's $800,000, which is required right now to make our local match, so we can access significantly more in state transportation monies. That number will grow over time, and we do not yet have a serious plan in FY16 for how we will handle that $800,000 local match. That will be one of the things we will need to develop over the coming months. So those are some additional context for this option. Then lastly, in the memo, I'll just note that there was discussion of sustainability coordinator, and so I've provided the write-up that we used in last year's budget for this position. I'd be happy to get your comments on it. It is a need that we have advocated for in the past. Other options would be to try to assign some of these responsibilities to existing staff, which we've really worked hard to try to do, but we've really struggled with it. With the development activity that's going on in the city, the natural people who would take on this task, either in our planning department or in our public works department, are all essentially buried in work because, good news, we've got a lot of development activity in the city, a lot of capital projects going forward in the city, but that capacity does not exist to take on this function. Lastly, the internal auditor. I do have the memo that we used last time that provides additional discussion of that, and we can distribute that. Let me pause for questions, and while we're going through questions, I'll just pass out a look ahead at FY16 for discussion. Projections always have big caveats and big asterisks associated with them, but the effort with the modeling is at least to lay things out there so that they can be quantified, understood, poked at, and help inform decisions.
Questions, comments?
Just to finish, then, taken together, the actual reductions in spending and the potential for use of fund balance or other items that the council may discuss would produce the level tax rate. But the actual spending reductions themselves compose 2.5 cents of the reduction, and the use of fund balance is roughly 2 cents of the reduction.
Thank you. Again, questions, comments? Mr. Duncan?
Okay, thank you. I think this is a very helpful information, and we really appreciate the effort that you've gone to scrub things. I'm sure we would all like to have all that we would like to have, and yet we know that that's probably not going to be the case, and so we have to make some hard choices, and I look forward to taking this outline into the community and talking about it and asking people if it does not, if it does balance the needs and the sacrifices that have to be made in certain areas for us to have the opportunity to, in the coming year, as you say, develop a plan and articulate a plan that the community can understand about how we meet our needs, not only with taxes but also with new revenues. So just to make sure I understand, the amount of money would remain $638,000 that would need to be reduced, and the $680,000 that we gain would be what accomplished the additional savings or revenue to flatten the tax rate at 130.5. Is that right? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, Ms. Conley?
I have a couple questions. In this document, thank you, Wyatt and Richard, for scrubbing numbers. In this document, you reference the Regional Transportation Fund, the $800,000 match. On the first page, it says the Transportation Fund. Is that the same fund? Is that a different fund?
We put all of our transportation funding now into a transportation fund, which the city council created last year, and so that's where that NVTA regional money goes.
Right. So this transportation fund here on the bottom of page 1, is that the same fund?
Of this memo?
Of this memo, yeah, at the very bottom. It
Okay.
says all vehicle purchases, major equipment purchases, studies consultants have been moved out of the operating budget and into the capital fund, the transportation fund, or debt finance.
Yes, that's right.
So this is the transportation fund, is the same as the regional transportation fund.
The 800,000 is a part of the transportation fund, because that fund includes all of the other transportation-related monies as well. Same fund, but the 800,000 is just one component of the transportation fund.
So in that transportation fund, it is repairs to streets. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about the purchase of vehicles or
No, it's the full CIP.
the full CIP?
Is the transportation fund, so you have your 6-year money, your federal money, your 70-30% in this match. I just wanted to be clear that this 800,000 is a part of a larger fund of transportation for capital projects.
Okay. I might have another question about that later, but I'm going
Glad
to
to go in
process.
detail.
Okay.
The 800 is not the only thing.
Okay.
The relevance to this discussion in the paragraph is it's not supported by the tax rate. It's outside of the general fund.
Why is that?
The transportation fund,
Well, not the matching fund. I know the 800,000 is a match, but why is the actual $800,000 annual contribution that we may choose to make so that we can get a match? Are you referring to that as, quote, outside the budget?
well, it's just when it's appropriated, it's moved into the transportation fund. Right now, we're taking it out of fund balance, so it's not in the tax rate.
But that's because our fund balance this year is above
that's right.
17.9. I mean, it's money, it's fungible.
Sure.
Where it comes from, in some ways, I don't know if this is critical, but that is an allocation we'll make every year.
Yeah, I think it's obviously I've recommended that for this year.
Sure.
I support doing that. My
Yeah.
only flag that I'm raising is that next year we don't have a real good plan for how we're going to match it, and so that's the
But clearly, that's going to be a priority in spending, just
Sure.
like many other things. We might not have a dedicated source to fund schools, but obviously, we're going to fund the schools year after year. So I guess essentially, you're just saying it's a priority for next year, and obviously, we're going to want to make sure we do it, or we're going to lose matching funds,
That's
which you
right.
don't want to do as well.
It's an issue we'll have to solve next year.
Okay.
And
Other-
we managed to solve it this year, so right.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Keep going.
So Richard has talked about the capital reserve fund, which is the one, right? The capital reserve fund is the one that has not actually been funded. That would be long-term expenses like vehicles, right? You know what would be helpful? If there could just be a list of funds somewhere
We actually,
That's not-
we have one in the.
Is it,
in the budget
is it
book.
in the budget?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And it's essentially, it's like an organizational chart of our
Yeah.
funds, and so that is on page 31.
Okay.
And if that's not helpful, then, tell us and we'll look at it again. But it lays out, page 31 is what I've got.
Chart, definitions or whatever.
So you have your enterprise funds, you have general government, you have your component units. The general fund is really what the budget is mostly about. That's where all the, that's where the tax rate is and things like that. And schools and general government operations are funded out of the general fund.
So where does like the capital reserve fund that isn't funded fit and the transportation fund?
It would be your capital improvements program fund.
So if we put money in it, will we add it to the chart? Will we get the promotion?
Yeah, it could be. It's a source of funding for your capital improvements program, so.
So the special transportation fund, is that the transportation fund?
Yes.
It's just called special on this chart?
Yes.
And that's the
per state
800,000.
code.
That's the $800,000 that we'll get the match on.
Mr. Duncan?
So I just don't want to interrupt you, but so actually the thing that we have not put money into actually doesn't show up on the chart? Is that what you're telling me? Because it doesn't have any money in it?
That's correct.
Well, there you go. I mean, can't put anything in the box if the box ain't there. Come on.
I can fix that for you, Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, I'm serious, Maybe not this year, but,
For the adopted.
Are you still rolling or? Okay. I just wanted to jump back to if your initial numbers were 3.6 and 9.98, right, in the proposed budget, if we more or less tracked along what you outline in the middle of the second page, what would the percentage increase on the city, on the general government side be, and what would the schools number be?
The school number would be approximately 8.7, 8.6. And I'll need to, in the general government would be about 3.2, I believe.
You can get that later. So generally, the general government number is going to be a little above 3, and the school division number is going to be above 8.5. Okay, thanks.
So, Wyatt and Richard, so following up on Phil's question there, with this option 1, what then becomes the percentage that goes to the schools and the percentage for general government? The overall percentage is?
I haven't run that number recently. On the first page of your budget document are the basic numbers in the on page 3. So the school transfer is at 37 million, and the general government is at 36.3 million. If you take the debt service out,
Is that before or after your proposed change?
that's before, and so you would change those numbers. I don't think it would change the percentages
It
dramatically.
would be about the same percentage. Okay. Can I ask another question?
Of course, keep going.
Okay.
You're on a roll.
So back here on page 1 here, we're talking about one-time expenditures in the operating budget. I think that when the school board was looking at their budget, there was a bus that was not funded. They took a bus out. Is that right, Hunter? So, that's okay. So from the original budget to what the school board proposed, they took out a bus. This says all vehicle purchases, major equipment purchases, studies, and consults have been moved out of the operating budget. Does that apply to the school's vehicles too, or just city vehicles?
Just general government at
General.
this point? Yes. Because I have no knowledge of the school making their purchases through us.
Say that again?
the school generally doesn't make their vehicle purchases through us. In other words,
They
it
do their
wouldn't,
own,
it wouldn't be included in the CIP, it wouldn't be included in our general government budget. When we budget for vehicles, it's a capital outlay section in a particular department, and it's debt funded. Now, if council were to ask that it be included, we could include it, but the only question I would have is who would pay the debt service on it.
So
I
this
guess Phil probably
specific
wouldn't be-
reference is,
No, there would not be a good answer.
I'm not.
Family.
I'm
Getting-
not. I'm
getting
not
Phil
gonna-
to pay
I got to
would-
fix my Oldsmobile. I'm not going to be able to cover that. So that's a data information that we can learn here as we continue talking. I mean, the cost of the schools treating their vehicles the same way the city wants to treat theirs would incur a debt service cost, and who picks that? Well, how much is it, and who picks it up? Is information that you can get to them and to us.
but this
Yes.
specific reference is general government only, not
Right.
Well, actually, I did, it was my understanding that there weren't any in the schools either, and that was an example. If we had a big school bus
Run.
in the operating budget, then that would be something I think Mr. Snyder that's what his question was geared toward. Let's take it out of the tax rate
That's
instead of
that's
finance
exactly
it
right.
in an alternative way, and we just don't have those types of opportunities in the operating budget. That bus has already been taken out of the operating budget.
If there's anything else that's going on the school side, durable goods of long use, furniture, equipment, whatever, those would be open for discussion too?
Yes, they would.
Okay, so that's a conversation that you and Hunter can have at your office over cashew nuts someday. Someday very soon.
Actually, what we did,
We can hear you, but we
okay,
need you on TV.
sure, no problem. Actually, in terms of FY15, what we did is there is a bus purchase in the school operating budget that was scheduled for this year. And as it turned out, worked with our transportation director, and we ascertained that we could delay that until FY15. So what we did is we are not purchasing the bus this year, which will allow $90,000 to roll forward into fund balance. And then what the school board did was increase its use of fund balance next year by $90,000. And there is a bus purchase planned for next year in the amount of $90,000.
Thank you very much.
Before you leave, how long does a school bus last?
Normally 12 to 15 years.
Guess my kids haven't ridden on that one yet.
That's hard, dude.
Yeah, keep going.
So, Richard, is there another way to look at that bus purchase? That's what I'm wondering. Is there another way? Is there a way to look at that as a capital expense? Just asking.
All right, the policy is, for it to be bondable, it has to have a useful life of at least 10 years. Generally, it needs to be, to cost over $150,000. However, if council wants to purchase vehicles in bulk, we could conceivably have a package of vehicles to be purchased. We would debt finance it, but we would accelerate the debt repayment for those particular items so they stay under 20 years. Because generally, we would bond for 20 years, all right? So it's an option as opposed to a cash option. However, the question, again, is how does the debt service get allocated, and will there be provision in the specific budgets to cover it?
So if it was a capital expense and it was a school bus or a bundle of school buses, then the
Or
debt service.
bundle of vehicles.
Or bundle of vehicles. The debt service then would be split up between the school budget and the general government budget, depending on,
That would be the
The division of
preferable
those.
way to do it, yes.
oh,
I believe, is it GASB 34 precludes that?
Okay?
Wait, what does that mean?
It's an
Accounting.
accounting pronouncement.
But it precludes what?
Precludes what? The debt service allocation?
So it needs to be.
Well, many years ago, actually, school vehicles were actually included in the city's capital budget along with other items. A number of changes were made. Most of them were done because of an accounting ruling, as Mr. LeCondre points out, GASB 34, which basically says that ultimately, at the end of the day, the governing body with taxing authority is responsible for paying the debt, and therefore to set up a separate school debt service fund, which there was. It was Fund, I think, 62. So Fund 62 went away, and it all got rolled over into the general fund budget.
I would not debate the GASB 34. What I do debate is the fact that the school could pay for its share of the debt service without it being on its books.
So you could,
I wasn't trying to violate an accounting principle.
So this-
What I'm talking about is the practical. We can bond it, we can pay the debt service. However, we would like to be reimbursed for the debt service so it doesn't become part of our operational expenses.
Still on the roll?
while she continues to think, so I'm curious just what kind of money we're talking about here. So you're talking, I love you guys. I hope you got a picture of that. That's good.
No,
that's,
you did not.
That's the kind of spirit of cooperation that we're looking for here in the next 10 days.
No fist bump.
So if you bought a bus for $90,000, which it sounds like is in your budget, or you bonded it and paid the debt service, what's the debt service on a $90,000 bus that you're trying to accelerate the payment on faster than 20 years? I mean,
Well,
is it a lot of money? Is it enough?
No, it is not the amount of money. It's the principal that you'll be paying for an asset that is depreciating.
Diminishing, right? Yeah.
Okay, that's all. So that's
Okay. Well,
Other questions? Other questions? Mr. Z, do you have a question?
Only if the Budget Finance Committee has completed its first stage of questions.
It sounds like it has, so why don't you get rolling?
Well, thank you for bringing these documents to our attention tonight. I think it's a lot to absorb in, I think it was 5 minutes that we had to look at this, and, we may be pretty good, but I have to tell you, we're not that good. It does raise a bunch of questions. However, the one thing that I think it does, and we're all happy for that, is that it begins to allow the city and the school system, all of us, to move to convergence so that we can put the whole process of budgeting as proposed, as ratified, its finality. We can then move it to implementation, and the good news is that we can then begin the FY15 planning process early. I know that's probably good news to you. So I do have some questions here that maybe you could illuminate. At the bottom of option 2, where you show the business license and admin fees as reductions, that is that's the difference between 14 and 13?
no, their budget to actual. All right. In other words, we budgeted a certain amount for BPOL, and we have not met that budget target, and we are forecasting that we will not meet it.
Okay. And the other question is, when you, on the spreadsheet, have these numbers been vetted through all the departments, or are they based on algorithm? For example, the school transfer request, you have a Low of, low of 8%, high of 9%, is that?
We got that data from the school division.
Okay, great. Are you still working on some of the other elements that we'd asked about with respect to the additional Parks and Recs needs, or another example would be making the development fees instead of at 75% of revenues, only contributing 75% to make it revenue to cost neutral? Are we still working on those pieces?
Well, with respect to the second piece of it, the fees, you do have an ordinance that's before you to raise the fees, and that is really designed to have them sustained at the 75% level. And so we would need to go back to the drawing board on those to get them up to 100%. What we have proposed, though, is a 20% increase in the fees, and so that's put forward as a step in that direction, but not going all the way in one step. The park maintenance issues, we have not provided numbers to the council on those. We can do so, coming from this discussion about with council guidance. I think that overall, though, in terms of the investment in parks, because we do have projects underway, bonds have been issued for them, park improvements are going to happen. We do think that ultimately we need to get more money into our regular maintenance, but right now we've got good things happening in our parks, and therefore we didn't ask for additional funding for it this year. But
I do want to thank you for a discussion on the sustainability coordinator. I think that we could all be in agreement that if we wanted a resource like that we're going to have to find an innovative way of acquiring that. And it may just have to be something that if we do find a resource, that it wouldn't be a city staff, it might be a slower, lower intensity start. We contract out certain pieces to find that, and we can find the money for that. So there's probably more discussion on that. And that's kind of where I am right now. I'm sure that when I wake up in the morning, I'll have lots more questions and be happy to ask them then.
Other questions, comments? I know we have, by the way, I'd like to mention that Dave Snyder is on travel for work and was not able to be here. I don't know what's happened with Nader. I hope he didn't have a family emergency, but obviously not here. But we certainly welcome his comments as well. But are there other comments, for example, as to option one? Do people feel that's a step in the right direction? Something that maybe will present the shell of something that could be agreeable to, majority on council? Any thoughts, comments? Mr. Duncan?
Just I'm, yes, generally supportive of option one. Just a question, since you referred to parks, nothing in here in any way significantly would change that part of the budget that's devoted to CIP work. In other words, we are still going to do everything that we had laid out in your original budget as to the work at TJ, the work at Thackeray, the work on the Mount Daniel project. All that goes forward unaffected, you would presume, by anything that would happen in the option one area.
that's correct.
Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Oliver?
On option one, Wyatt, I understand the rationale for splitting the further reductions in spending based on the percentage increase, but I think alternatively, if you look at the relative sizes of the general government budget and the school transfer, you might think that it would be more logical to split that a little closer to 50-50 rather than on that 37-63%. I know what you're trying to do is to make up for the growth in spending, but we're still talking relative sizes of budgets, desired budgets, and there's a concern there. And as for option two, I guess my point is that I don't like the idea at all of using one-time money to cover operating expenses. To me, it feels a little bit like making the minimum payment on your credit card rather than trying to pay off, a substantial portion of the balance. And you might need to do it in an emergency, but it's not something that you want to do in the long run. And so when I look at option 2 and we look at dipping into fund balance or using surplus revenues to cover operating expenses, which we then need to cover the next year, I think we're digging ourselves into a hole, and I'm concerned about trying to take this all the way down to a flat tax rate, if that's the only way we can do it.
Okay, other comments? I think one thing I would point out is that we did vote earlier this year on realignment of the tax and fiscal year with the idea that that kind of imbalance would be balanced out. In other words, you wouldn't have the need to depend on last year's surplus to keep you going in the next year. The idea was that we would really align both things to allow much greater certainty as to budgeting. And so I think, at least part of the reason I voted for was that it would diminish the variability from year to year of what the surplus might be and how it might affect either the past year's budget or the next year's budget. So I think that is something, a consideration to keep in mind with respect to that aspect, that this is the last year that this is sort of going to come into play.
Yeah, I think that's, your point's well taken. And as Mr. C said, we need to get started as early as we can on planning for the next year, because it is going to be a different kind of landscape. We're going to have more accurate forecasting numbers because we've aligned the years, and so that's just a reality. And we're going to have to find the transportation match money. There's some things we're going to have to do, but as the mayor said, I think we just all agreed, it was Mayor Baruch's idea, and I supported it strongly, that we just had to get out of the business of doing a budget, that we passed on April 28th, and then finding out on April 29th that we had, $600,000 or $700,000 that the public didn't think that we knew that we had. It was just very, as Nader said, very difficult to message. And anyway, we've solved that now, and I do think it's legitimate to use the money in the way that the manager has outlined, understanding that we're all now more aware of where that money comes from, what it is. It is, to some degree, money that we are going to need to generate for the new budget in ways that we will do, because that's what we always do here. It'll have to be a match of revenue generation, new revenues, and still restraint and cost controls, because at least for the next couple of years, organic growth is not going to keep pace with the asks generated by school enrollment, and we know that, and we need to begin planning for that as soon as we can. So getting this year's budget behind us and getting started on next year's is important.
So in terms of trying to make some progress, and again, we have two major players who aren't here, and I don't want to speak for them, although I would say, if Nader doesn't return, that I think he does share your concern about using surplus for this year's budget, but I don't want to speak for him, and hopefully he will be able to come back and speak for himself. Other than that, I guess I would just kind of try to get a sense, is this option 2 appealing in general form to others on council? This is, again, the use of the surplus with the cuts described in option 1 to come up with a flat tax rate.
I like option 2.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Conley, do you have any thoughts? Okay. So consensus, but that doesn't mean it won't be the only option to consider as we go forward. But I wanted to kind of get a sense of council as to thoughts. So just to flesh this out a little bit, Ms. Oliver, so you're not in favor of using surplus as this budget, and so would you propose that delta be made up in an increase in taxes of maybe 2 cents or whatever the amount of the surplus is, or would you propose additional spending cuts?
I think it's difficult to see how we can take on additional spending cuts. We're at a stage where we really need to invest in some aspects of this city if we are going to survive in the future. For example, the transportation. So we are going to need those transportation funds in the future, $800,000. We don't have that built into the current tax rate. Where's that going to come from? With 130,000 units being built up at Tyson's. You have to imagine that the transportation issues in this city are going to continue to grow. I sat in the CACT last night and, you know, they were talking again about the number of neighborhood traffic calming proposals which are in the pipeline. We don't have the staff for that. We don't have the funding for that. As transportation grows, this is a regional issue. This is not a Falls Church issue. It's not just our development that's driving the traffic. What's really going to drive the traffic in this area, an issue that we have to deal with, is going to be what our neighbors are doing. And it's also regional trends. We have immigration. You know, the growth in this region with people migrating in from other countries and other parts of the United States, with the number of housing units going in around us. I'm really concerned that we're shortchanging key aspects of our infrastructure. And so I don't like the idea of paying more in taxes more than anybody else does. I actually suspect that as a percentage of household income, I pay more towards taxes than anybody else in this room. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't pay more to make sure that the city has the basics that it needs to move forward, especially, you know, we are looking, we are hopeful, we don't actually have all the modeling. You know, we've talked about doing long-range planning. How is it that we're going to make sure this city is sustainable? Well, if we shortchange our spending now, we are digging ourselves into a bigger hole, in the same way that if you only make your minimum credit card payment due, you dig yourself into a bigger hole. So, you know, do I think that we can cut a couple of cents out? You know, I'm grateful to see that we have this debt service savings that's been found. I would love to cut the tax rate and still spend on everything that we need to spend, but I think we need to be realistic, and I think we need to make sure that we don't create a bigger issue for ourselves next year or the year after that. So I'm just uncomfortable with option 2 for that reason.
Okay. Would you like us to present, or staff to present, another option for us to consider at Wednesday's meeting?
For what purpose?
Discussion purpose? I mean, for us to decide? I don't think we've decided anything tonight. I mean, I think you've got a general feeling. We have 2 members who are not here, so I mean, I
Right.
think that certainly we're making no decisions. Yes, I mean, we're not making any decisions tonight, and the idea is we're going to have continued discussion. I think the purpose of trying to find out where people are, at least at this moment, is the idea to try to narrow the discussion down, because we do have to come to a decision coming forward, but we're not making a decision tonight, and there's
Right.
certainly additional time to have further discussion. So I don't want anyone to feel that they can't propose a different option and, you know, attempt to present new information or obtain new information and sway people. We're not taking a vote tonight.
No, and all I'm saying is that I appreciate option 1. I think option 1 is reasonable. I think that's about as much as I would be happy doing. That's my personal feeling.
Okay.
I've told you that for option 2, I think that, you know, we are just creating a bigger problem for ourselves next year. I mean, we are asking, between the general government and the public education reductions, we're asking for a reduction of $638,000. We already have $694,000 in critical unmet needs, and another $1.195994 in important unmet needs. It's a significant portion of our budget. And eventually, not meeting these needs is going to catch up to us. And, you know, yes, we do hope that we will have future revenue, and I think that we need to start that planning process to try to take a look at what point in time that could happen. If you could tell me that we would have the revenue in 2 years, that makes sense to draw the fund balance down now, because we're going to be caught up in 2 years and really flush with money and able to put money back in. Then I would say, okay, we could live with that for 2 years. You know, I'd, you know, be biting my fingernails because I'm conservative financially, but, you know, but you can't tell me that in 2 years we're out of the hole. And that's my concern with dipping so deeply into, you know, our safety net now. I guess the only other option I would want to take a look at maybe is a variation of option 1 and saying, okay, Wyatt, could you take on half of the reduction that you've proposed as opposed to just a third of it? That's all.
I think certainly the mix of reductions is is on the table. We have a proposal from the city manager, and it's not his proposal, but it's what we requested him to do. But it is absolutely open to our discussion. And so that is just one option with the basis based on the percentage increase. But that is not the only thing on the table. It's just something to have a structure for a discussion. But absolutely, to the extent we're going to have cuts, and I think it is appropriate to have some cuts, we need to decide, what percentage goes where. But this is one option. What you proposed is the second option. I think it's worthy of discussion. Whether we do that tonight or whether we do that on Wednesday. I don't know the best time, unfortunately, because we have two people not here at the present, but we just clearly need to have that discussion before we wrap this up. So it sounds like from what I just heard from you that you'd like to have further consideration option one, and then we also have the option two, of course, is on the table as well. Okay, so, I have to say, given that we don't have other people here, and it seems like our discussion has basically been had, in terms of questions, comments, I think maybe it's time to move on to the next thing, unless anyone's got anything else to discuss about this. Unfortunately, I don't think we're able to really advance this discussion much further. I think there may be some discussion. I think at least one of the people not here would probably have some additional comments as to particularly option two, but I don't want to have that discussion without them here, and I certainly won't want to speak for anyone else other than myself. So, Mr. Z?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. There are two critical experienced people that are here with us tonight, and I'm sure they're going to bring some viewpoints to this discussion that would be valuable for the discussion. I'm wondering whether there's some way we could do a hybrid of these two options. Is that what you were suggesting earlier?
No, not really. The problem with a hybrid is that you don't end up with a flat tax rate. You end up with a 1 cent tax rate or something like that. And I think for some of us on this council, the idea of having a flat tax rate is important, not just for what it is, but for the symbolism, I think, of what it is. And so, to me, it goes beyond sort of sometimes in for a penny, in for a pound. And so, there may be support for it. I don't know. I guess from my perspective,
No, I think I would retreat back to my original position, which is flat tax rate.
okay.
Simple.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just say to that, the importance of a flat tax rate for me is to give us, some space to acknowledge that over the years the rate may grow, but at this point, this time, the combination of the increase in assessments and the stormwater levy and the originally proposed rate was such that I think there was a fairly broad lack of confidence that we had a plan to go forward. And we do have a plan. We work at it a lot. We don't perhaps communicate it as deliberately as we might, but I do think we need the opportunity to articulate that plan more clearly. It's a long-term revenue growth plan. The easiest thing in the world would be to get together here every year and just raise the tax rate, but we all want to work harder than that, and the good news is we have tremendous potential in this city to grow our revenue if we are so motivated, while retaining the character of the community. So I will not extend my speech any longer, but that's just to say that I look forward to hearing what the community thinks about this, and to understanding a little more clearly the ratio. My general notion of the 37-63 split is the city, at least as I've sat through our meetings, has not asked for anything excessive. The kind of additional positions that have been asked for, some of which are going to have to go, have not been frivolous. And so I'd be reluctant, just as the schools I'm sure would be reluctant to give up anything. So I'd like to start at least with the assumption of a 37-63 and see where that takes us after each of our bodies does its due diligence.
Any other comments, Ms. Conley? Yes.
Wyatt, with option 2, is there use of the unassigned fund balance in option 2? Or there's not. This is just using the surplus, but the fund balance will remain at 17% in option 2.
That is correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, in the budget, we draw down our existing unassigned fund balance down to 17%. This is additional fund balance coming in because of surplus revenues in FY14, which aren't currently on our books yet.
Okay, so this is if this money wasn't spent, then our fund balance would go up to 19%.
It would be deployed in next year's capital improvements program.
Okay, so
That's
rather
how
than
it would
putting
be
it into
used.
capital improvements program, it's going into operating. Okay.
Okay, are there any other comments at this time? Shields?
In terms of spending reductions, I'll just tell the council that in terms of sort of the first priority of things that I will then come back to you with on the general government side would be first to look at the new initiatives that we proposed. And we'll need to go deeper than that, obviously, but I just wanted to get some feedback from the council. Is that what your expectations are? Are there other things that you would say, here's, Mr. Manager, here's what we want you to think about in terms of where to make these cuts?
I would say, first off, I imagine people will have some guidance for you as to those things. I can give you some myself. But I think as well that I'm not sure we want to micromanage to the extent that we're talking about whether you hire a half-time person or not. And so I think you'll get some, kind of big picture guidance as to maybe a couple initiatives you've talked about. And we may leave it to you ultimately as to some of the smaller things that you're proposing. Unless people really want to get into every little detail of it, and that's up to council. Any thoughts from others on council? Mr. Duncan?
No, I do not want to get into the details. The council manager form of government discourages that, and I intend to support that wholly. Just looking at the defense for the positions that you added, I think Mary Beth and I, there's some aspects of a couple of the jobs, maybe even three of them, a sustainability coordinator, which is not funded, I know, the marketing person in the EDO, and the communications person in the OCOM. It might get a little complicated, but if there's some way to choose the most important aspects of all three of those and somehow meld them into one super duper position, that would be an interesting thing to see. I don't know where that box fits on your chart, but I don't want to sound too much like, we want cuts but don't cut anything, but if you're just asking for a suggestion, that's one thing.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, then maybe the discussion for the budget is over for tonight, unless there's anything else to add. And then the next item of business is a closed session for the acquisition of real property.
Sorry, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
The internal auditor, the attached memo, sorry.
Yeah.
The internal auditor attached memo, which I didn't have. Are we having any discussion of that?
Too.
Well, I haven't seen the memo, I don't know.
I haven't either.
Sorry. Well, we can take that up as a discussion at the next meeting. It has been discussed by the council in the past, and the reason for it is we're dealing with water sale proceeds, we're dealing with a very large capital program. We have more money than normal passing through the city's financial management. It was not a recommendation in the budget for the following reasons. In our internal risk assessment, I think our greater risk is in terms of the fact that we are understaffed for the people who we need to do the job, to manage capital projects, to manage the invoices, and that the risk is really on the error side because people are trying to manage too many things at once, too many balls in the air. And so that relative to the risk of fraud in our small organization, where we don't have some distant purchasing office that, who knows what those people might be doing over there. It's one person. He's right here next door to the CFO. Everybody is known, and the work is so closely shared, and so many people have to touch it, that I think the risk of fraud is low. And so in that risk analysis, my first emphasis would be on meeting those staffing level needs in terms of managing these capital projects before going the route of internal auditor. Even our larger peers like Loudoun County, sometimes they go into a political mode where they want to have an internal auditor, and then they go through a political mode where they fire them and get rid of them and clean them out. And those are organizations that handle hundreds of millions of dollars more than we do. And so I don't think it's necessary for an organization of our size. But we did have the discussion. This memo relates some of our thinking on it, and we'd be happy to follow up and have additional discussion with you.
Okay. I'd say it may be premature to have that since we just received the memo just now, unless you want to have it right now. All right, why don't we go on then, unless there's any further discussion on the budget, go into closed session. I thank everyone for coming tonight. We are about to start a closed session, which means that most of you will have to leave in the audience, but thank you for coming out this evening. There'll certainly be more time for discussion and for input. We want to work collaboratively with you all and intend to do so. So we'll see you soon. Thank you very much for coming. All right, let's go. Okay, let's go ahead and, if we can, attempt to go in closed session here. Upon a motion made by council member
Duncan?
and seconded by council member
Connolly.
and passed by a voice vote of city council, council went in closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia for the discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, Roberts Park expansion. Councilmember Baruch is absent. Councilmember Conley?
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan?
Yes.
Councilmember Oliver?
Yes.
Councilmember Snyder is absent. Councilmember Z?
Yes.
Councilmember Tartar, yes. Okay, we are in closed session. Thank you all. Let me shut the doors and give them a second to get the microphones off. Okay, thank you. We're coming out of closed session. It's 9:37. Upon a motion made by council member
Oliver.
and seconded by council member, somebody?
Connolly.
And passed by vote of city council, council reconvened in open session. Councilmember Baruch is absent. Councilmember Conley,
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Councilmember Oliver,
Yes.
Councilmember Snyder is absent. Councilmember Z,
Yes.
Councilmember Tartar, yes. 9:37. Let's do a certification upon a motion made by councilmember
Z.
and seconded by councilmember
Duncan?
and passed upon affirmative roll call vote in open session was certified that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session or meeting by the city council. Councilmember Baruch is absent. Councilmember Conley,
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Councilmember Oliver,
Yes.
Councilmember Snyder is absent. Councilmember Z,
Yes.
Councilmember Tartar, yes. It is still 9:37. All right. Unless there's an objection, let's go ahead and adjourn our meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Meeting is adjourned.